Well, hello friends, welcome back to Dig It with Raven. I've got a very special video for you today, and I've gotten all gussied up to present it to you. Why am I dressed like this, you ask? Well, this is what I would have worn if in 1939 I received an invitation from a Miss Edith Pretty to attend a party she was hosting at her home to, quote, sip sherry and view the remains of a Viking ship burial. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm getting invited to go and sip sherry next to a newly discovered archaeological site that would forever change history, I'm getting dressed to the nines and I am taking no prisoners. So in honor of Edith Pretty and the new Netflix film The Dig that's coming out today, let's all get dressed up, have a watch party, and just pour one out for the amazingly incomparable site that is Sutton Hoo. What I'm gonna do is give you all of the hardcore, super fun archaeological background to the site of Sutton Hoo, so when you get all dressed up and have your own watch party for the dig, you can be that amazing person on the couch that just drops the hardcore facts while Ralph Fiennes and Carey Mulligan just do their thing on screen. Without further ado, I don't have sherry in the house, but I have port, so let's pour one out for Sutton Hoo. Sutton Hoo is a site located in the county of Suffolk in the southeast of England. The land is home to a bunch of these very peculiar mounds that kind of just sprinkle the fields around it. And this is where Edith Pretty, the daughter of a very wealthy industrialist, and her husband Frank, a retired colonel, settled down in 1926. Unfortunately, 12 years later, Edith was widowed and left with a young son, and she withdrew from society. Now, Edith and the friends that she did interact with were spiritualists, and this was nothing new in the 1930s. A lot of people were very into this new spiritual movement that was going on at the time. But the story goes is that she did visit a lot of mediums and she partook in a lot of these sort of spiritual events. Now, it was either her or a friend of hers who claimed that there were these very shadowy, mysterious figures that were wandering around the mounds of Sutton Hoo. Most notably was a very astute warrior atop a horse that was on top of the largest mound. Ooh, just got some chills. Like, is it getting spooky in here or is it just me? Edith seems to have been quite the curious person. It is known that she had visited Egypt in the past, so she was familiar with archaeology and the notion of, the mysterious things that might lie beneath the ground. Of course, there was also always the rumors that there was gold hidden in these mounds. This was a very well-known rumor around the area that if you look in these mounds, there's gold to be found. And luckily for us and for Edith, she was a woman of means and privilege, so that means she could afford to have some exploratory archaeology done on her lands. And that's what happened in 1937. Mrs. Edith Pretty contacted the Ipswich Museum in regards to her mounds, and they suggested that Mr. Basil Brown, a self-taught archaeologist who was very local to the area, go ahead and take a look. And the rest, they say, is history. Basil Brown was quite the passionate archaeologist, and together with the help of the gardener and the gamekeeper from Sutton Hoo, he went about going and exploring some of the mounds over on Edith's property using her household items, essentially. So things like coal shovels, pen knives, and pastry brushes. I think that's pretty fantastic, to say the least. Like, just no nonsense archaeology right there. Using what you got, MacGyvering it, but doing it carefully as well and doing it properly. I love that. And of course, this was meant to be just, a very small, informal type of dig. Brown's first season of excavation took place in 1938, where he excavated a few of the smaller mounds. So mounds 2, 3, and 4. Wait, 2, 3, and 4. There we go. These mounds contained a few objects and some evidence of human remains, but nothing of any major significance. It did confirm, though, that there were things in these mounds. Nothing he found that year would prepare him for what he was about to find the next summer. For Brown and his ragtag pair of helpers would soon uncover one of the earliest, most important, and richest ship burials from the early medieval period in Northwest Europe. So now we are in the summer of 1939. Brown turned his attentions over to the largest mound on the site of Sutton Hoo, which is Mound 1. And after a few exploratory trenches, he found this very hard layer of soil that was stained with rust and contained very regular intervals of rivets. Brown soon realized that what he discovered was the impression and the oxidized rivets of a ship. The wood itself that the ship was made out of had long disappeared, and that's due to the soil conditions in the area. So it was very acidic, and a lot of the times with organic materials like that, they don't survive very long, especially in acidic environments. They just decompose. But luckily, we have the ghostly impression of the ship, which is, I think it's so cool, but also like kind of spooky. This could have been like a very spooky episode, you guys. A lot of the time it is very easy to miss these soil marks and impressions of the wood. So we really just have to bow down to Basil Brown for that right there, for his work, because we owe him so much. This man was so thorough and so careful with his excavation that he was able to recognize it and excavate it properly so we could get the entire outline of the ship uncovered. The excavations showed that the ship would have been a mastless rowboat made out of wood, obviously, and it would have measured about 80 feet long with room to hold 40 oarsmen. The size of the Sutton Hoo ship was comparable to Scandinavian ships dating to around the same time period that had also been found earlier in the 20th century. So I can just imagine what was going through Basil's head at the time. Like, can you guys think, like, he's known what's been found, he's seeing what he's uncovering right now, like, just, he must have been beside himself. Just the possibilities, you guys, the possibilities. Even though it's already been found and I know what's there, it's still so exciting to think about putting yourself in that situation of being on the precipice of something so much bigger than you ever imagined. Of course, a find like this, even in its early phases, would not have been able to stay quiet for very long, and word spread around everywhere, really, and it did attract a lot of famous archaeologists, particularly Charles Phillips from the University of Cambridge. He visited the site just before they were about to excavate what they believed to be the burial chamber, and he decided that the project was just much too big for this, little underdog team here with Basil and the house helpers. So what he did was he brought in a bunch of other archaeologists from Cambridge and from the British Museum to continue the excavation, and poor Basil Brown was demoted to just a regular excavator. The poor man was like just demoted out of his own discovery. Like, I would have been so salty if that happened to me. But of course, in the name of science, the show must go on. And in July of 1939, over the course of 17 days, very, very short excavation period, some of the most amazing things started to come out of the ground. And oh my lord, you would not believe what they found. The burial chamber had collapsed over time with, the weight of this giant earth mound, obviously. And so a lot of the objects were not in the best shape. But regardless of that, everything in there was still just astounding. When you think of a treasure trove, this better be what you think of, because this is literally and physically and culturally the ultimate treasure trove. They found 41 gold items, so belt buckles, shoulder clasps that were enameled and filled with garnets. They found weapons, there was gold and garnet jewellery, there was remains of a shield, there was silver that was imported from all over the place. There was even some silverware that was inscribed in Greek. There were these amazingly decorated drinking horns, drinking vessels, a bronze bowl from the Middle East. That's really far away back then. And there was also this little, what they call like a coin purse, and it did actually contain coins inside. And these coins were just from all over Europe. So you can imagine the vast trading networks that this person and this society had, like Middle East, Byzantium, Greece, all over Europe. There was also something else they found, but we're gonna get to that later. The finds at Sutton Hoo must have just been completely overwhelming for the team on site. Other archaeologists, you'll understand it as well with me, but like I've been on sites where the entire team freaks out if someone finds a coin, just like a tiny little coin, or just even like a cool piece of pottery. Everyone just like flocks and runs to them to see what it is. So for a treasure like this to be found unlooted, undisturbed, untouched, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I would have actually been able to keep my cool at all during this dig. I would be of no help because I would just be in constant like freak out mode. Every single object was so finely made and richly ornamented that it was clear that this burial was definitely for someone of great importance if not even an ancient king. Upon proper analysis of the finds, it was concluded that this site was not a Viking ship burial, as Miss Edith Pretty's invitation said for her party, but was in fact an Anglo-Saxon burial dating to around 625 CE. And we're able to get a date like that that's like so precise thanks to the coins. No body was actually uncovered in the burial, so it has led to a few theories of people thinking that there was never any body there and this was more just like a cenotaph to the dead person. But it is also possible that the bones, like the wood, just decayed, and especially if it's in an acidic environment, and mounds are very prone to become acidic, especially in this area, because all of the water kind of just seeps right through the top of the mound and creates this like acid bath essentially that would just dissolve bone very, very quickly. So there are possibilities that there was a body, it just didn't survive. And if we're talking about survival, I just want to point out quickly that it is just complete dumb luck that these goods were undisturbed and unlooted. They found evidence that grave robbers had actually probed the mound at one point, and they narrowly missed the treasure. Phew, like thank goodness, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to live in a world where we didn't know about Sutton Hoo. There was no time to sit and revel in this discovery, however. Remember, they were digging in July of 1939. World War II is just around the corner, and they had been feeling it over the last few months. Tensions were rising, war could have been declared any day, so they were racing against the clock to make sure that they got the finds out in time. The excavation team would have been under such immense pressure to work quickly but also be as thorough and diligent as possible. Some people have called it a rescue excavation, and you can definitely see it as that. And we do have to just, again, bow down to the archaeologists on site there for working so diligently and so hard to make sure that everything was excavated before the war started. Of course, the timing for the finds of Sutton Hoo was a little convenient for World War II, I would say. It being the largest Anglo-Saxon ship burial that had ever been found to date, and it, you know, kind of harkening back to this warrior culture that the ancient Britons had, the site became sort of a symbol of patriotism, and in keeping with the patriotic nature of the war, Edith Pretty did donate all of the finds of Sutton Hoo to the British Museum, where you can visit them today. But they did not stay in the British Museum during the war because of the bombings. What they did was they boxed them up, actually most of them still probably had dirt on them, and they stored them in a disused London tube station. And that is where they remained until 1947 and 1948. Finally, when the artifacts were brought above ground once again for proper conservation, study, display, and publishing, another amazing find was discovered among the assemblage. Herbert Marriott, the curator of the British Museum at the time, noticed these very small metal plates that he believed to have been a death mask. So what he did was he jumped at the chance to make a reconstruction. But with this reconstruction, we found out that it was not a death mask. It was a helmet. The first reconstruction was a little bit controversial though, because it didn't quite cover and protect the neck and the face very well. So they did another reconstruction in 1968 thanks to the keeper of the medieval antiquities, Robert Bruce Mitford. And I must say it looks a lot better. The helmet was originally made of iron, but it would have been decorated in these tinned bronze pieces that showed different decorations. It was so highly ornamented, this helmet. We found some images of, for example, a rider trampling a fallen soldier. There's another image of these two warriors sort of like dancing with spears and some pretty fancy headdresses. Don't even get me started on the detailing of this thing. The helmet itself could be a video on its own, but I do want to point out very quickly the very fancy toothbrushed style mustache that he fashions in this helmet, as well as the amazing eyebrows. I'm a pretty big fan of the eyebrow game, and these guys, they got it going on. They've got some garnets underneath, they end in some boar's heads with tusks. There's even like a dragon here, so like I give it a 10 out of 10. Wear that down the runway, wear it to any party, any occasion. Apparently when you wear the reconstructed helmet, it drops your voice tone a little bit and it echoes, so it gives you a little bit of a Darth Vader BDE vibe on the battlefield. Are the cool kids still saying BDE? Is that still a thing? Am I showing my age by trying to be cool by saying BDE? Let me know if BDE is still a thing down in the comments below, because I need to know what the cool kids are saying. I need to be hip to keep up with the algorithm. Another thing that we can tell about the burial from this helmet is that it must have been pretty sturdy, and it would have stood for quite a long time. The fragments themselves were very, very corroded, and the size, how tiny they are, indicates that it would have been rusted and sort of already falling apart before the burial chamber collapsed on it. That means the burial chamber would have had to withstand the weight of the mound for quite a long time to allow the helmet to rust and corrode in order for it to be smashed into these tiny pieces. So that's pretty cool. But now for the big question. Just who did this helmet and this entire ship burial actually belong to? Due to the quality, the quantity, and just the overall nature of the artifacts in the burial, there is no doubt that it was definitely someone of great importance. One of the earliest interpretations that came out in the 1940s and 1950s was that this burial and these goods were provisions for a voyage into the afterlife in accordance to Anglo-Saxon religious beliefs. An interpretation like this really does strengthen the ties that this Sutton Hoo burial has to the Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf. There's a section in the poem that discusses burials, and the correlation does seem to match up quite nicely. Of course, correlation does not equal causation, so coincidence? Probably. But the evidence from Beowulf does encourage us to form some sort of interpretation at Sutton Hoo that the culture that created this burial did sort of believe that the afterlife involved some sort of voyage to another world. This is not the only ship burial. There are other ship burials in other countries and other cultures. And so we can never be 100% sure. This is all just speculative. It's archaeology at its finest. I've also read somewhere that modern scholars of this era are kind of in disbelief that the Anglo-Saxons had a belief in the afterlife in the 7th century CE, but I am not an Anglo-Saxon specialist, so please do not quote me on that and do your own research. We must think critically, fam, okay? Later archaeological interpretations suggest that this was indicative of some sort of conversion to Christianity within the society, where this was the last pagan king of this line and they discarded all of these, quote, polluted pagan artifacts in the burial. But then there's another interpretation that suggests the opposite, where there was a Christian king and now it turned more into a pagan community, and so they disposed of the Christian artifacts. It's even been suggested that the site itself is not a royal burial, just an elite burial. There are, of course, a few other interpretations, but you can just kind of see from the suggestions that I mentioned how muddy archaeology can get, even when we have the full entire context for a find. There's one more possible interpretation that does seem to be the most popularly accepted one. The dating of the coins found on site, along with the Christian and pagan iconography of the finds, has led a few scholars to believe that this burial belonged to Raedwald. Sorry, I said that wrong, but he was an East Anglian king who ruled from 599 to 625 CE. Raedwald had apparently converted to Christianity, but had sanctioned the practice of both the Christian religion and the Anglo-Saxon religions. With the wealth of the burial and the date correlating with it, this has become sort of the widely accepted option. Of course, attributing the Sutton Hoo burial to King Raedwald will always remain a possibility, as we have no way to discover who actually owned this burial. There aren't any proper identifying markers, and there was no body for us to do any DNA analysis on. What we can tell about the burial is that there are strong cultural correlations to what was happening in Sweden at the time. The helmet has a lot of similar iconography to some examples that have been found in Sweden, and the use of ship burials was quite common practice in the North Sea and Baltic areas a few hundred years before they started to become popular in the areas of the UK. These practices were introduced into Eastern England around the 5th century CE due to cultural exchanges and trade. So the burial at Sutton Hoo has kind of thought to be considered as taking these traditions to the extreme. A ship burial on acid, you might say. Regardless of who was actually buried with this ship, and amongst all of these fantastic yet haunting goods at Sutton Hoo, the site remains one of the most famous archaeological discoveries in the world. The burial at Sutton Hoo was actually the very first archaeological site that we studied in my Archaeology 101 class. So I need to say thank you to Dr. Ross for showing my class that Sutton Hoo video on one of our very famous archaeology film Thursdays, which I I think should become a thing. I need to bring that back. I think what makes the discovery of Sutton Hoo so captivating is not particularly what was found, but the story behind it. The inconceivable circumstances, the mystery, the colorful characters, the suspense, the race against time, and all of the challenges that had to be overcome for the burial of this ghostly king to come to light. So there you have it, friends. The story of Sutton Hoo and the archaeological evidence behind the new Netflix film, The Dig. The Dig is based off of a book that's based off of the real life events, so there will be many a Hollywood liberty taken, but now you have the backstory and you can go and watch the film with a little more familiarity and a lot more appreciation for what this find really meant for the field of archaeology. As always, if you want to learn more about the site and do some further reading, I've left all of my resources in the description down below and on my website. If you like that video, go ahead and smash that like button down below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and if you like the channel, you like my videos, you like what I do, and you want to help support it, head on over to Patreon and become a patron. You get early access to all of my videos. You get to decide what videos will come out every quarter. You'll also get some fun free swag, and you might even get your name on the screen right here. Here are all of my socials, and as always, stay dirty, my friends.